Alex, it's going to be your turn to share work, and I'm just anxious to hear what you have for us. So what are you going to start with?
Okay, well, I'm going to start young.
Okay.
Well, actually, yeah, I'll even go back to like when I was 11 years old. And,
Cool.
You know, and my mom's in the living room and I come in and say, I just wrote a little poem, Mom. And she goes, oh, what? And I said, why am I living but that when I'm asked if I've enjoyed life in the past, I can say yes, my life is grand. I've done so much in so small a span. And then my mom goes, oh, well, that's okay, you know.
You said that when you were 11?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I like it.
Then
I like
high
it.
school was a great time for me in many ways, but I had an English teacher named Mrs. Sauerbrauer.
Really?
Yeah. And
Was she sour?
no, she was very sweet.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sweet and sour. We studied poetry, and we studied Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is one good inspiration. Actually, I don't find his sonnets, you know, like they don't necessarily bring poetry out of me, but the plays, the iambic pentameter, brought this one out.
Okay.
Night, after hours of scheming and planning, conquers the world in her light once more. And knowing no way to defeat her terror, man smothers the candle and closes the door and hides in his bed from the fear and frustration and worry and wonder and pain and despair, and pulls up the covers of sleep and creation and dreams that his troubles have gone and aren't there. But then, in the morning, the sun has appeared to conquer the darkness and make the land bright, and man sees his troubles are less than he feared, for the day has restored what he lost of the night. So he puts on his armor of honor and love and enters the battle against saddening thought, and when his life's over, he rises above and meets his Creator and is glad he has fought. So that was at 17, you know, in high school. And Mrs. Sauerbrei said, you know, you're one of the first students I have that I think could really be a professional poet. But get another job. Just, you know, don't try to do it. But like I said, I'm not practical. So times in my life when I've gotten inspired by poetry, then I tend not to be practical.
Well, I wanted to say one thing, since you did that, and for our listeners, that just came from your head. You did not read that. You had that memorized. That is one reason I feel I could not be a musician, because in front of a mic, if I don't have paper that I can read, my mind goes blank. So I totally admire that.
Well, thank you. Those early ones tend to stick in the mind. That's what my grandfather always said. Memorize poetry when you're young, you know. And
That's true.
so moving along to the years after I went to college and quit school and hitchhiked around, and I went through another period of time where I was reading some poetry. And somehow or another, it's kind of subconscious. You get these rhythms in your mind. So this was another, that was when I was 17. This was when I was about 20 or 21. There's a power in the atmosphere that drives away the clouds for fear they'll melt or burn or disappear. Electrostatic syncopation. All my demons on vacation prods me as I stroll along to sing the world a freedom song. Ah, la la, la la, la la. Ah, 'tis fine to feel so holy. Watch the world go roly-poly, twitching, switching, singing, swinging to the rhythm of my singing. Tail-wagging dogs advancing, freckled, smiling children dancing. Ants are breaking ranks and prancing round and square and helter-skelter. Moles emerging from their shelter. Trees upon their trunks are beating. Bees in unison repeating in strange tongues my song of greeting. Ah, la la, la la, la la. Ah, 'tis fine to feel so holy. Watch the world go roly-poly, twitching, switching, zinging, swinging to the rhythm of my singing.
Wow.
Really? Really?
So
Wow.
you can see these early influences, which were reading the traditional poets where they had rhythm and meter.
Right.
I tended to be influenced by that.
And so I was going to ask you, I mean, that's one dimension, I mean, the classics, a classical writer, would you say that's true? That's a dimension that you have?
It's one dimension,
Okay.
yes.
Mhm.
And these were before I really got serious about writing poetry. You know? Another time, I had been working on several bicentennial God Bless America festivals in 1976. And after that, working on things and being very concerned. This was the 70s. And actually, any time that you pick in our history is a time of tremendous concern, just as today is. You know, it was a period of time when there was a little bit of miasma for a while. And there was like a very serious threat between us and the Soviet Union. That young people today, they never lived through it. They don't really know. It's just history. So this was another poem that I wrote that just sort of came out. Rise, America, land of ancient dreams, send forth your light in sacred laser beams. In New York Harbor, a stony lady stands who holds a torch to light up all the lands. The sweat and tears of humble men shall saturate that torch, and then ignited by a fire divine shall make the light of freedom shine. Rise, America, land of ancient dreams, send forth your light in sacred laser beams. The darkened skies have caused your flames to flicker. Politicians moan, clerics bicker, but now a fire has come to hasten our correction, to burn the chaff, to smelt the ore, to show us new direction. Let us hear no more of selfish cynics desponding, but rather dance with all our hearts to love's great call responding. Rise, America, land of ancient dreams, send forth your light in sacred laser beams. I see Hispanics, blacks, and whites dancing in the northern lights. I see the gods of Asgard holding hands with holy men from hidden lands, Oriental sages, men of science, and Native American medicine men in a holy alliance, standing up in strong defiance, sharing their blood in a common reliance upon the holy primal word that Adam in the garden heard. Rise, America, land of ancient dreams, send forth your light in sacred laser beams. Now I think that one, see, you can see there are influences coming in from reading, because that one has a William Blake influence. You know, so I like to read a lot, I like to study a lot, and then it's not apparent a lot of times, the allusions that come in. You know, it's like with T.S. Eliot too. You read his love song of J. Edward Prufrock, full of allusions to Shakespearean passages.
That's true.
That if you read it, they just jump out at you, and yet they dance in his poetry. If you haven't read those things, the poetry is still beautiful. You just don't know what he's talking about.
That's right. And once again, to tell our listeners that Alex read, that was all just came from his mind. He was not reading that. It just flowed. And I so much admire that. And while I'm saying that, I want to remind our listeners that this is KKRN, Community Radio, and this is Late Night Poetry Jam. All right, Alex, what do you have for us next?
Well, I just want to go, because then I was getting a master's degree in publication design, and to improve my writing skills, which were primarily expository at that time, working for nonprofits, I decided to take a poetry class, and it changed my life. At first, I could not write under my own name. I wrote under a pen name named Thor Alexander, because I felt that I was too much in my head. And so there are poems that I wrote, and I don't want to take too much time, but an interesting phase that I went into was I kind of came into contact studying different groups of poets and everything. I sort of immersed myself in it, studying their lives. There was a musician. It was the kind of the Fluxus movement, the be-in type of thing, the beginning of performance art. And there was a musician, and I should be able to remember his name. It was John, first initial M. But he was a fairly good composer, and then he studied for a while under D.T. Suzuki, studying Zen Buddhism. And he changed his philosophy of art. His philosophy had been to communicate, to try to have inspiration or wisdom or beauty and communicate that to others through his music. But studying under D.T. Suzuki, he said he felt that that was limited. That was still in the realm of conceptual of concepts and not really in touch with the ultimate undefinable reality. And so D.T. Suzuki tried to teach him that the purpose of art from a Zen viewpoint is to stop the mind.
Mm-hmm.
If you can stop the mind, then out of the nothing will come moments of insight and inspiration. So I thought that's an interesting concept, and just a little short piece here.
Well, can I ask you a question? Because I'm sitting on the other side of the table from Alex, and he has these thin books with just interesting titles like "I Am Big Pin."
Big Pen, and I tell you, Big Pen. That's one of my favorites.
Is it?
It is.
So could you read some of the other titles of these pamphlets you have, or chapbooks, or what? I'm not exactly sure what you call them. What?
Bugs and I have their chapbooks with 21 poems in each
Okay,
one.
cool.
Bugs and I, the title poem is about a dream that I had where I went over a cliff with Bugs Bunny.
Okay.
So dreams are another site of inspiration. Power in the Atmosphere is the name of the second poem that I did.
What is this one?
Land with No Snakes.
Okay.
Sounds like Ireland.
Yeah, it does sound like Ireland, and
Okay.
and then I have over here one called Sperm Whales, and that comes from the myth of Uranus and Kronos. When Kronos severed Uranus' male organ and cast it into the sea, and there was a tiny bit of sperm on it, which then gave birth to Aphrodite. And so I take that myth and I develop it along a line to where, why don't we have a national football team named the Sperm Whales in the National Football League. So they're all
Okay,
odd
okay.
assortments of poems.
So what are you going to read?
This one is called Opposing Influences, and this was influenced by by the composer that I can't remember his name, but that idea of trying to stop the mind. So I started for a period of time not using form, and or maybe using form, whatever, but trying to stop the mind instead of being able to communicate. So I just thought I would read one of those because it was an interesting period, called Opposing Impulses. Born of an impulse fed by decaying leaves, Ishtar eats impossibility. Thus, your absence renders me impregnable to any thought of responsibility. You know my name. I wrote it on your window on the 1st of June when the drips were granular, unbearably hot, like hell's fires beneath the silver spoon. All paths part, but all paths meet, my dear. Paris is swell. Wish you could be here. And then the opposing impulse is, dine for the sight of bursting bulbs. Hades spits out possibilities that in your presence makes me quite vulnerable to sin. You are as ignorant of my aliases as a blackbird in December when ditches stand cold as frozen spit. This garden knows no paths, my dear. No exit, no exit, no exit. People say, well, what does that mean? I go, I don't know, you tell me.
Well, you certainly have a range of writing and creativity. I'm impressed.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful.
Alex, I'd like to hear I Am Big Pen.
Okay, all right. And I'll just say that when I was at the University of Baltimore getting this master's degree in publication design, and the poetry workshop was Kendrick of Pelkey, and she used a book called A Poetry Handbook by Mary Oliver. And it was an excellent thing, and I really recommend if people want to get into writing poetry, get involved in a poetry workshop. And so one of the things Mary Oliver talked about, meter and form. And so I, was going over iambic pentameter, and our assignment that week was to write a poem from the point of view of an inanimate object, or another person, another voice.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have to be an inanimate object. And I couldn't think of what to do, and I was reading about iambic pentameter, and I had my big pen there in my hand, and I went, I am Big Pen. I am Big Pen to meet her. to feel her hand embrace my shaft, to spread my ink the first time, every time upon the virgin page, to feel fantasy flowing through my tip, producing sighs of ecstasy, to sense mystery probed and poems taking flight. I can scarce express with what delight I am Bic Pen to meet her. And when my blue fluid spent, I lie dry, discarded in some rubbish heap. Do not weep, for I have felt the muse's gentle touch. Far better Bic Pen to have been than Cross or Parker scratching memos on some bureaucrat's pad. And when at last into the recycler's kiln I'm cast, to burn and blister and be no more, and tongues of flame reduce me to a glob, remember, billions more in the Rite Aid store stand prepared, proclaiming to the poets of the world, I am Bic Pen to meet her.
Love it.
That is very unique. Yes, it is.
And that one, I actually was up in New York. My daughter's a really good, Honolulu Colvin, out in the East Coast, well-known, very good performance poet.
Oh.
And I went up to visit her in New York, and she said, Dad, you want to go down to the Bowery Club? And I said, sure. And so they had a slam poetry contest that night. And some of Selena Glenn, one of the national poetry slam contests, was there, and several other top poets from New York. I did that poem, I got all tens. Competing against 17 other poets, got selected into the final 3 for the end of the competition.
That's fantastic. I love it.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful.